My name's Frank Mallory. I never wanted to be one of those men screaming into the void online. Never cared for it. To me, the internet is a sewer pipe straight into your house. Nothing but lies, filth, and narcissism. People these days can't change a tire, but they'll spend all day pretending to be experts in everything from politics to plumbing. I stayed away from it all. Figured if you can't say it face to face, it's not worth saying. But after what happened up here, after what I saw, I guess I owe you folks a warning. You don't have to believe me. I don't expect you to. I wouldn't have believed it myself, back when I still had a badge and a mortgage and a wife who remembered to wear her ring. But if you live out in the sticks, especially near the woods, keep reading. After my ex-wife gutted me in the divorce, I took what little the lawyers hadn't picked off and bought 10 acres of scrub forest and rock in northern Wisconsin, a battered cabin, a rusted well, and enough space to finally breathe. That's all I needed. I did 26 years as a cop in Milwaukee, most of them in homicide. Saw the worst people can do to each other and still walk free. I dealt with junkies who cut their mothers, gangbangers who ran over toddlers by accident, and neighbors who turned into monsters over property lines. By the end, I was a shell, burned out, cheated on, divorced, and disgusted with a city that stopped making sense a long time ago. I was done with people, done with orders, and damn sure done with ex-wives and their boyfriends sleeping in my bed. The first few weeks out here were rough, but honest. Chopping wood, fixing the place up, hauling supplies from town. At night, I'd sit with a glass of wild turkey by the fire, listening to the wind cut through the pines. It was lonely, sure, but the right kind. I figured I'd die up here someday. That sounded fine to me. Then I started losing chickens. At first I thought it was raccoons or maybe a hungry coyote. No big deal. I reinforced the coop, put up wire, and set a few traps. The usual. Didn't help. One morning I stepped outside and found the coop torn apart like a damned soda can. Dead birds everywhere. Feathers plastered to the trees. One footprint left in the mud, about the same size as my own boot, but off somehow. It had 5 toes, sure, and the general shape of a human foot, but the proportions were wrong. The arch was too high, the heel too long, and the toes looked stretched, clawed, as if the tips had started fusing into something more animal than man. The ball of the foot was broad and deep. The imprint sunk a full inch into the soil like it had carried double the weight a man should. It looked like a mockery of human anatomy, familiar but warped. Just staring at it made my skin crawl. I didn't say a word, just cleaned it up and started keeping my rifle loaded and close by. That's how I was raised. You don't cry about the storm. You board up your windows and wait it out. The next few nights I sat by the window with the lights off, rifle across my lap. I waited until sunrise. Nothing. But every time I let my guard down, it came back. I'd find deep claw marks on the porch railing. Once I woke to the stink of rot in the house itself, something wet and rank and wrong, drifting in through the chimney like a warning. I thought maybe I was losing it. Too much trauma, too much time alone, too many years carrying bad memories. But the tracks were real. The claw marks were real. And then I saw it. It was just after midnight, near the tree line. The woods were still, like they were holding their breath. That's when I noticed movement. A crouched shape emerging from the shadows, hunched like a gorilla, its frame heaving with slow, labored breaths. The thing was large, probably over 7 feet if it stood straight, but it didn't. It looked broken, twisted, deformed. I watched it through my scope for a while. Its fur was thick, dirty, mottled with patches of gray and black like soot baked into the hide. The way the light from the moon caught it, I could see the wiry hair was matted with filth and blood. The head was the worst part. Wolf-like, but off. Too wide in the jaw, too narrow in the cranium. It was like someone had sculpted a wolf's skull out of wet clay and let it sag before it dried. The ears were jagged, one torn almost in half. The eyes, God, the eyes, were milky and reflective, like yellowed marbles under cloudy water. They locked onto me with a stillness that chilled my bones. It wasn't curiosity in them. There was something far worse. It was recognition, like it had seen men before, maybe hunted them, or had been hunted by them. There was memory in that gaze. Not human memory exactly, but the ghost of it, warped and distant, buried under whatever it had become. Those eyes looked at me not like prey, but like an adversary, something it was sizing up. They studied me with an eerie patience, scanning my cabin, my weapon, my stillness. It wasn't just animal instinct, it was tactical, as if it was trying to decide whether I was worth engaging or if I'd be too much trouble. There was no fear in them, just cold calculation. I'd seen that look before, in the eyes of cornered men, when they were about to throw a Hail Mary. I took aim and eased my finger onto the trigger. But before I could take the shot, it melted back into the trees without a single sound, like fog slipping between branches. Crafty bastard. I'll give him that. I stood there for a long time before I even remembered to lower the rifle. My heart was hammering. My hands were numb. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept checking the windows, listening for footsteps, half expecting it to circle back. But it didn't. Not that night. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch, still gripping the rifle like a crutch. That's when I saw what it had left behind. Half a chicken carcass laid right at the top of the steps, ripped clean in two, like it had been pulled apart by hands instead of teeth, almost like a grim little gift or a message. I don't know which chilled me more, the idea that it had gotten that close again, or that it wanted me to know it had. Whatever it was, it didn't just vanish. It watched. It thought. The next morning I called an old buddy down in Prairie du Chien, a retired K9 handler, asked if he knew anyone selling proper dogs, not pets, guard dogs. He didn't ask questions, just gave me a number. I picked up Max and Bruno 2 days later. Both were Caucasian Shepherds, bred in the mountains to fight bears and protect livestock from wolves. Each weighed more than I did in high school. They didn't bark much, just watched. Good dogs. Smart dogs. I felt safer with them on the property. For almost a week, things were quiet. No missing birds, no stench. I started to think maybe it had moved on. Then came the storm. Not just rain, but one of those heavy, rolling summer storms that shake the bones of the house. Lightning lit up the woods in strobe flashes, and the wind howled through the trees like it was angry. The kind of night that makes you double-check your locks and wish you hadn't let the fire die down. I was sitting in the dark, the dogs pacing restlessly near the door, when the first crack of thunder rolled so hard it rattled the panes. And that's when they snapped, both Max and Bruno, growling, ears flat, bodies tense. Something was out there. Even through the pounding rain, they could smell it. So could I. That familiar stench, rot, wet fur, coppery blood, came seeping in through the walls like smoke. I grabbed the rifle and swung it up to my shoulder as I cracked the door open. Rain came in sideways, stinging my face. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, the tree line lit up like a photo negative. I stepped out, raising the rifle, and scanned the woods through the scope. The magnification brought the trees in close, too close. Every branch looked like claws, every shadow twitched. My breath fogged the glass, and I wiped it clean with the edge of my sleeve. Max and Bruno stood behind me, growling low, their hackles raised. They didn't bark. They were too focused for that. They knew something was coming. So did I. That's when I saw it again. It stood at the edge of the clearing, half in shadow. At first it moved on all fours, stalking along the tree line with a lurching gait. In the low light, it looked like some overgrown hyena, shoulders high, hindquarters low, its body rippling with sick, uneven muscle under patchy fur. The way it moved made my stomach twist. It wasn't natural. Then it stopped. With a visible effort, bones cracking audibly over the thunder, it began to rise. First one arm, then the other, claws digging into a tree trunk for support. Slowly, it lifted its torso upright like it had done it before but hated every second of it. When it finally stood on 2 legs, its full height was terrifying. But what froze me was the spine. Long and impossibly twisted, jutting out beneath the wet fur like a ridge of broken stone. It hunched over itself, like standing was more a threat display than a resting state. Long arms dangled low past its knees, claws glinting in the next flash of lightning. It wasn't just some mangy animal. It was something else, something sick, a monster straight out of a nightmare. Max and Bruno didn't wait for a command. They lost it, howling, barking, absolutely berserk. Before I could steady myself, they slammed into the back of my legs like a pair of furry battering rams, knocking me clean off my feet and sending me crashing into the muddy porch. The door flew open, and they tore out into the storm like demons, paws ripping up turf as they barreled across the yard. I hit the porch hard, the rifle flying from my hands into the mud. For a moment, I was stunned, wind knocked out, ears ringing from the thunder, eyes blinking through the rain. I scrambled up to my elbows, soaked and dizzy, but I couldn't see a damn thing past the downpour without the scope. But I could hear it, snarling, barking, that awful bone-chilling scream that didn't sound like anything that should exist. Max and Bruno were on it. No hesitation, no fear. I heard bodies colliding, claws scraping wood or bone or both. The deep-throated rage of my dogs mixed with the shrieking fury of that creature. Somewhere out there, just beyond the edge of my vision, a war was happening, and I didn't know who was winning. It screamed, not like any animal I've ever heard. It was part human, part dying machine. I finally found the rifle, half buried in the mud, and snatched it up with shaking hands. Rain ran down the barrel as I crawled to the edge of the porch and braced myself against the post. I wiped the scope and got it to my eye, breath catching in my throat. Through the lens I caught the chaos. One dog had latched onto the creature's throat, hanging on with everything he had. The other was on its flank, tearing with violent precision, his teeth buried deep in slick, matted fur. The monster flailed, long arms swinging, claws flashing through the storm as it tried to shake them off. Its body writhed like it was coming apart, every movement erratic and spasmodic, like pain had rewired the way it moved. Then it managed to grab one of the dogs. One of its hands snagged him by the hind leg and yanked him off the ground with a violent jerk. The dog howled in pain, legs kicking, jaws snapping at empty air. The creature brought him up to its grotesque face and bit down hard on the dog's back, right between the shoulders. Even from over 100 feet away, I heard the crunch, sickening, sharp, and felt bile rise in my throat. He screamed like I'd never heard a dog scream, a sound that still claws at me in the dark. I couldn't get a clean shot. They were all tangled up in a blur of fur, blood, and muscle. My hands were trembling, my breath ragged, but I forced myself forward, slowly walking across the mud, boots slipping under me, rain dripping off the brim of my hat. Every step felt like a lifetime. I could hear the monster snarling, the remaining dogs snarling back, and that sickening wet sound of teeth and claws meeting flesh. Then the beast reared back, its arms rising into the storm, the limp form of Max hanging from its hand like a broken toy. It let out a howl, deep and guttural, like a furnace backfiring, and in that second, I saw the opening. I took the shot. The first bullet hit its side with a thump like hitting wet leather. The second struck lower, maybe the gut. I couldn't tell in the chaos, but it folded slightly with the impact, its scream rising into a strangled, mechanical screech. Black fluid sprayed out in long arcs, thick as motor oil, splattering across the wet grass. The thing buckled, arms flailing, legs stuttering in the mud. I fired a third time, this one into its ribs, and it let out another howl, high and hoarse, but it didn't go down. It staggered backward a few feet, wheezing, dripping black. Then with a burst of frantic strength, it swung one clawed hand and swiped at Bruno, catching him along the flank and sending him tumbling with a yelp. Then it turned, hunched and shaking, and limped back into the trees, fast and clumsy, like something trying to outrun its own collapse. It didn't vanish like before. It fled, dragging one leg and leaving a dark trail behind. It looked over its shoulder once, right at me, Not in rage, in recognition, and maybe, just maybe, in fear. I ran to them, rifle still half raised, eyes darting toward the tree line, as if the thing might double back. My boots sank into the soaked ground with every step. My breath was coming hard and fast, heart still pounding from the shots, and the sight of that thing dragging itself into the woods. Max was lying in the mud, motionless, except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. A massive wound gaped between his shoulders, the fur torn open to the muscle, skin glistening raw and red beneath the rain. I knelt beside him, quickly assessing the injury with my free hand. It was bad, deep, ragged, and already swelling, but he was breathing, barely. His eyes flicked toward me, glassy with pain but aware. No growl, no whimper, just a silent plea to make it stop. Bruno had fared a little better. He let out a choked snarl and tried to follow the beast as it vanished, his paws slipping in the mud. But halfway through the yard, his back legs gave out. He crumpled mid-stride and dropped into the wet grass with a grunt, sides heaving, ears pinned back. Even downed, his gaze stayed fixed on the tree line like he expected it to return at any second. I dropped to my knees beside Max and wrapped my arms around his soaked, trembling body. He didn't whimper, just looked up at me with wide, glassy eyes. He was torn up bad, and I wasn't sure if he'd make it through the night. Bruno dragged himself closer, pressed his body against mine, as if to say, "We're still here. We fought, and we're not dead yet." I didn't waste another second worrying about the thing. If it wanted another round, it could have it later. Right now, my boys were bleeding out in the mud. I slung the rifle over my shoulder, scooped Max into my arms, and rushed him to my truck. Bruno managed to limp behind me, struggling to keep up, and I half-lifted him into the passenger seat once Max was secured in the back seat. I tore down that muddy road like a man possessed, headlights bouncing, tires slipping through puddles. The vet in town was experienced enough not to ask questions when I barged through the doors after midnight, soaked in blood and rain. I just said, "Help them," and she did. Both dogs had to remain at the clinic for several days. Max needed surgery. Bruno was stitched and sedated. I didn't sleep while they were in there, but I couldn't sit still either. The morning after the attack, just as the sun broke through the thinning storm clouds, I drove back to the cabin, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and followed the trail into the woods. Whatever that thing was, it had bled, and I needed to know where it went. I needed to end this, once and for all. The trail was easy enough to follow at first. Dark stains on trees and trunks, broken branches, and deep drag marks in the mud. It led me through the thicket, down a ravine I'd never bothered to explore before. After about a mile of trekking through wet brush and ankle-deep muck, I found it. Lying against a mossy boulder at the bottom of the ravine, half covered in wet leaves and dirt, the creature was still breathing. Barely. Its chest rose in shallow, labored gulps, and one leg was twisted under it at a sick angle. It was trying to pull itself deeper into the brush, but it didn't have the strength. Even from a distance, I could see its eyes flick toward me. It didn't growl. It didn't move. It just watched, quiet and beaten, like it knew the fight was over. I kept my rifle raised and started down into the ravine, boots sliding on the wet slope, heart hammering. Every instinct told me to finish it then and there, but I had to be sure. I had to see. I got within 10 feet, close enough to hear its wheezing breath, close enough to see the way its skin split around twisted bones, how the fur grew in patches between thick scabs. The smell hit me like a fist, rot and wet fur and something else, something sickly sweet and wrong. And the eyes, they didn't blink, just followed me, hollow and bloodshot, sunk deep into a skull that looked both ancient and incomplete. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Part of me, the rational part, the cop, kept trying to categorize it, to fit it into some known box, some mutated bear, a deranged man in a suit, but none of that held up. Not after everything I'd seen, the way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes, the blood, the stench. The silence. This was no ordinary predator. I thought about old stories I used to laugh at. Campfire tales and blurry photos. Dogman. Werewolf. Whatever the hell label you slapped on it. I was looking at one. A real one. Not a myth. Not a costume. A nightmare made flesh. Wounded and breathing. Just 10 feet from where I stood. And I had no idea how many more of them were out there. And I couldn't stop thinking, what if someone else had moved into that cabin? What if it wasn't a burned-out ex-cop with a loaded rifle and 2 war dogs? What if it had been a young couple trying to get away from the city? Or a family with kids that would have played outside, run through the woods, made noise, drawn attention. I imagined it watching them, stalking them, waiting for the right time. The idea made me sick. Whatever this thing was, it didn't belong out here, or anywhere near people. And God help whoever finds the next trail of strange prints if they're not ready for what's at the end of it. So I did what had to be done. I lifted the rifle, took a deep breath, and put 4 more rounds into it. It didn't scream this time. It just shuddered, exhaled a final ragged breath, and went still. I watched it for a long minute, heart pounding, waiting for even the slightest twitch. There was none. Then I hiked back to the cabin, grabbed a jerry can of gasoline from the shed, and returned to the ravine. I poured the fuel over that twisted body until the stench of it mixed with the sharp reek of petrol. Then I struck a match and tossed it onto the heap. The fire roared to life, and the thing burned hot and black, sending a column of greasy smoke twisting up through the trees. I stood there until it was nothing but crumbling, charred bones and ash, just to be sure. That afternoon, after the smoke had cleared and my hands stopped shaking, I went back into town to check on Max and Bruno. They were still sedated, but alive. The vet said they'd both make it. Max would have limited movement in one shoulder, but he'd live. That was more than I could have hoped for when I dragged them through her doors just hours earlier. I brought in 2 massive raw steaks, sirloin, best I could find, and gave one to each of them while they dozed in their recovery pens. Bruno managed to lift his head and lick at it. Max didn't move, but I left his there beside him. He'd get to it soon enough. On my way home, I called the breeder, ordered 2 more Caucasian Shepherds, told him I wanted them big, lean, and stubborn, the kind that would stand their ground when it mattered. Hell, I even started thinking about breeding them myself, not for money, but for security. If the world was going to keep pretending things like that creature didn't exist, then someone had to be ready when the next one showed up. It's been months now. Everything's quiet again. No missing chickens, no claw marks, no howls in the dark. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I catch a whiff of rot drifting through the trees. Just a hint, faint but unmistakable. I freeze every time, ears straining, heart ticking up like a Geiger counter. Maybe there's another one out there, or maybe it's something else now, waiting, watching from deep in the woods. I keep the spotlight mounted, keep the new dogs trained and well-fed, and every night I lock the doors, load the rifle, and listen. Why am I writing this? Because I've seen too many fools online dismiss stories like mine, call them hoaxes, creepypasta, trash for clicks. I used to think that too. Now I know better. This wasn't a werewolf from the movies. It wasn't fast or magical or handsome. It was broken, diseased, full of rage and hunger and pain. If you're out there living in the quiet places, watch the woods. If your animals go missing, if you smell something you shouldn't, if you hear something that sounds almost human but not quite, you'd better be ready. I sure as hell will be.